This is Auditory Anthology. I'm your curator, Keith Conrad. We release new episodes every Thursday. If you like what you hear, I hope you'll take some time to rate and review our show on your podcast player of choice, and be sure to recommend it to 5 friends. Maybe not 5, just however many friends you feel like. That'll help us grow the show and continue to share these stories with you every week. Also, if you have a story you'd like to contribute to this series, you can visit submissions.soundconceptmedia.com or just follow the link in the show notes. This week's story is The Man Who Remembered, an original story by Spiritus Dei. We meet a young man named Randy, a man who found himself at the tender age of 29 just beginning to see his life take shape. He had a job he could tolerate, which is really the dream, isn't it? He was contemplating the future with a newfound optimism, and was even thinking about re-entering the dating pool, which would probably kill the optimism part. But Randy's plans took an unexpected detour when fate dealt him a fatal hand, an accident that ended his life and sent him on a path through a surreal afterlife bureaucracy.
I died yesterday. That really sucked. I was 29, and things were just starting to work out. I finally had a job I could tolerate, and I was thinking about dating again. I suppose none of that matters now. I'm in processing. It's a bureaucratic mess. Apparently my life history got mixed up with my cousin who died a couple of weeks after me, and he was returned, but now I have to wait for them to correct the timeline. It's the cosmic version of the DMV. I'm supposed to be able to attend my funeral. I know this because there are a series of elevators where people come out crying. Their memories are voluntarily wiped clean after they're allowed to process it. Those memories are available later if they ever want to access them. There are several men and women dressed in their Sunday best to provide all these details as the bereaved sign off on their memories. It's not all bad. They have a nice hotel with a casino if you're into gambling. I'm not quite sure if there's a religious motif. I'm a little nervous to ask for any details. I know this isn't heaven. There are no casinos in heaven, but it doesn't seem to be hell either. I met a guy named Jake who was in the hotel room across from me. He cannot remember anything about his life, which I guess is customary, but due to the mix-up, I can still remember who I was, and even the moment I died. I can't believe I was hit by a bus. At least I wasn't crossing the street. I was in my car, driving through an intersection. That's a very cliché way to die. I decided to have dinner with Jake at the all-you-can-eat buffet, and when they say all-you-can-eat, they're not lying. You can always be hungry here, and nobody is overweight. We were there for what felt like hours, eating and chatting, mostly about my life, since Jake could not remember anything about his life. I asked him how he knew his name was Jake, and he couldn't explain it. I told him there was a famous song about a dog named Jake. "Do you think you can help me remember who I am?" Jake asked, stuffing his face with his 16th serving of chocolate pie. "I doubt it," I answered. "I think your memories are stored in a central server or whatever they call it in this place." Jake stopped eating for a moment. The wheels in his mind were spinning. "Maybe we could break in and find my memories?" This seemed like a pretty bad idea. No doubt we weren't the first afterlife guests to hatch a plan to retrieve old memories, but since I had nothing better to do, I decided to patronize him. "Sure, I guess the first step is to ask around and find out where they're located," I said, lifting a glass of chocolate milk to toast to the idea. The first place we visited was the casino. You can lose all of your chips and just get more chips. We played roulette and tried to have as much small talk as we could, but just like Jake, nobody knew anything besides their first name and their room number. And then I had another idea. We should talk to the men and women in the suits who comfort the bereaved as they exit the elevators. We went back to the main office and waited. And waited. There isn't a sense of time here, so I would like to say we waited for days, but there is no day or night. We just waited for a very, very long time. We waited so long the thought of eating became interesting again. And so we found ourselves back at the all-you-can-eat buffet. "We never sleep," I said to Jake while carefully cutting my 5th T-bone steak. "Do you miss sleep?" Jake thought about it. "I don't remember sleeping. It's when you close your eyes and have dreams." I put my fork and knife down and closed my eyes and pretended to start snoring. "Like that," I said, opening my eyes. Jake didn't appear to understand and went back to his strawberry shortcake. I started to wonder what else doesn't happen here. "Jake, do you think we can die here?" Jake laughed. "We're already dead." He had a good point, but perhaps there were layers to this. We need to test it out. A few moments later, Jake and I were standing on the 5th level of the hotel, looking down on the grand ballroom. "Well, Jake, let's hope I am wrong." I jumped off and landed on the piano, which in a normal world would have broken into 1,000 pieces. The middle-aged man playing the piano smiled and said, "I guess you didn't want to take the stairs?" I felt embarrassed, but nobody seemed to notice. A second later, Jake landed flat on his back beside me. "Wow, that was fun!" Jake said, laughing. Jake and I sat at the roulette wheel, discussing our failure to die again. "Maybe if we jump from the 50th floor it'll work better?" Jake asked. The man behind the roulette wheel broke from character for a brief moment, listening to our conversation. Wait, do you know something?" I asked. He looked around as if he might be watched. "You can't die here, you're already dead." "Thank you, Captain Obvious," I responded. "If you want out, you have to talk to Memphis. She's the only one who—" A red light went off, and sirens. Jake, oblivious, thought the flashing lights meant we'd won something. "Hey, that's good, right?" Several men in suits showed up at our table. "The roulette wheel is closed." They escorted the roulette player off. "Wow," Jake said, "I wonder how much he won." I realized in that moment everything we said was being recorded. From the very moment I arrived, my every move was being tracked. I wondered if they could also track my thoughts. We decided to go back to our hotel rooms to retire for well, there was no night. I just sat in my bed and remembered how much I enjoyed sleeping. I lay there, with my eyes wide open. I then laughed at how wrong Shakespeare was. "To die to sleep? Yeah, right!" I yelled. I'm not sure how long I lay awake in bed, but eventually there was a knock at the door. I knew it was Jake. I pretended to be surprised when I opened the door. I asked what he'd been doing, and then he told me they have free room service and he's been eating the entire time. "Jake, I think we have to find the person whose name we cannot mention without setting off flashing red lights." "You mean I clasped my hand over his mouth. "Yes, that's the name." "Oh, right, I get it. We can't say the full name, so what are we going to call it?" I wasn't sure. I knew it had to be a really good name, something we could both remember. "How about Donut?" Jake said, smiling. "Donut? Isn't that perfect? I love donuts," Jake interrupted. So Donut became our code word. We found ourselves back at the all-you-can-eat buffet, but neither one of us wanted to eat. "It's kind of strange. I know I can eat as much as I want for as long as I want, and now I don't want to eat anything," Jake said, depressed. "Yeah, it's odd. Maybe if we could get fat, we'd still want to eat," I speculated. Jake didn't remember obesity, so I had to explain to him what happens during real life when people eat as much as we had been eating. "Maybe when we retrieve my memories, everything will start to make sense. I'll remember what I did wrong to wind up here," Jake said. This comment struck a chord. Did Jake view this place as a punishment? "Wait, what do you mean, wind up here?" I asked. "This place is awesome, isn't it?" Jake thought about it. If you want to eat and gamble, it's great, but what if you want to do something else? I asked Jake what he wanted to do, and he couldn't remember wanting to do anything, so I had to provide some examples. I miss fishing and walking along the beach, I said, which didn't help because then I had to explain what a fish was, and what the ocean was, and why I would want to do either. A few moments later, one of the suits arrived. "Jake, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but your next life is ready." Jake looked surprised and happy, but then he turned. "But what about him and his next life? Can he come with me?" The suit shook his head. "I'm sorry, we don't allow anyone to share their lives." Jake appeared confused. "But what if I'm not ready for the next life?" The suit appeared surprised. "You can take as long as you want." Jake perked up. "Really? You mean I could just let you know when I'm ready?" The suit nodded. "There's no such thing as time here." Jake smiled. "Well then, I'm going to wait." The suit looked at me and then back at Jake with another concerned look. "Jake, it's highly unusual for someone to pause their next life. If you'd like, I can—" "Nope, I've decided. No, thank you," Jake said, standing up. "Let's go lose some money at the casino," Jake said, and walked off. So that's what we did. We lost stacks and stacks of chips until gambling felt like eating. Exhausted, we returned to our hotel rooms. "Jake, you should probably go to the next life. You don't need to waste any more time here trying to find a donut that might not even exist." Jake leaned against the wall. "The donut exists. We just have to have faith," Jake said. I was surprised by Jake's commitment. I think I would have gone on to the next life, but I couldn't be sure how I would behave without access to my memories. "I could never live with myself in the next life if I knew you found the donut without me," Jake said, smiling, and then brought me in for a hug. I wondered in that moment if Jake and I had ever shared other lives together, or if this was just a quirk of fate that brought us together. "I'm glad we met," I said to Jake, and patted him on the back. "You're a brother from another mother," Jake said. "How do you remember that saying?" I asked. Jake thought about it. I don't know. Maybe there's a glitch in the—" And we both said it together. Matrix. We parted ways to lay on our beds wide awake. I thought back to my previous life and all the things I wanted to do. I wanted to be rich and famous. And yet, here I had as much money as anyone could ever want, and I didn't care about any of that anymore. And fame? Well, fame only mattered if it meant someone would love me. I knew that strangers could never love me. And then I thought about Emily, the only woman I had ever loved. I wondered if she was happy back on Earth, if she married the tennis coach she was dating. I took up tennis at the age of 10 just to be around her. "She probably doesn't even know I'm dead," I said out loud. Nobody answered, of course, but I knew they were listening, maybe getting a good laugh at my expense. I decided to visit the office as soon as I was tired of laying awake and find out why my life hadn't been sorted out. What would have been the next morning, if there was such a thing as time, I sat in the waiting room with Jack. I told him there were more interesting things to do than waiting for me, but he told me that sitting in a waiting room was more entertaining to him than losing money or eating. So we sat and stared at everyone else who was waiting. "Does anybody here remember their past?" I asked. Everyone seemed surprised that I was talking. Are we supposed to?" the young man with red hair and goatee asked. "No, you're not supposed to remember, but something tells me you probably had an interesting life." He didn't say anything. What could he say? He couldn't remember. "He remembers everything," Jake said, pointing at me. And suddenly, everyone was fascinated. For the rest of the wait, I answered question after question about my past. Finally, my number came up. 1 septillion, 244 sextillion, 344 quintillion, 434 quadrillion, 343 trillion, 332 billion, 434 million, 334,333. I had to double-check it a few times. Jake stayed in the waiting room while I sat down with a suit in a nearby office. "Mr. Sorry, your name isn't in the file. We cannot locate it," the suit said. My friends call me Randy," I said, realizing that it was the first time I'd said my name the entire time I'd been here. "Right, Randy. How can I help you?" the suit asked. "Well, I've been here for what seems like a long time. I realize there is no time, but if we base it on the pounds of food I've eaten or maybe the stacks of chips I've lost, it's been a very, very long time." The suit didn't say anything. "Is there a manager I can speak with?" I asked politely. The suit appeared confused. "What's a manager?" I then explained how the bureaucracy on Earth worked. This seemed like a foreign concept to him. He had no manager and no underlings. It was a miracle anything got done at all. "So how did you get this job?" I inquired. There was a long pause, and I knew what was coming. "I don't exactly remember. I mean, I think I must have been picked, or maybe I volunteered." I decided to refocus the conversation. "I'm looking to resolve a mix-up," I continued, trying to steer the conversation back to something productive. "My cousin and our files got tangled up, and I'm still here waiting for it to be sorted out. I was hoping to, move on to whatever's next, or at least understand what my options are." The suit nodded slowly, tapping on a device that didn't resemble anything I had ever seen. "I see. Well, the issue with the mix-up is a bit above my, I suppose, pay grade would be the term. Though we don't really use currency here. Let me see if I can find someone or something that might help clarify your situation." My mention of wanting to speak with a manager had seemingly triggered a protocol as the suit stood up and motioned, and I followed him. We walked through a series of corridors that seemed to loop in impossible ways, eventually arriving at a room filled with what appeared to be floating orbs of light. And beneath the orbs of light was a small Shetland pony. "This is the closest thing I have to a managerial entity," the suit explained. "You can present your case to Memphis." The suit left me with Memphis, and we stared at each other. "You're a horse?" I said. "A pony, to be precise, but I get that a lot," Memphis answered, swishing her tail. There was an uncomfortable silence as I attempted to make sense of this moment. "I guess you were expecting a donut," Memphis said, and then snorted. So you've been listening to me this whole time?" I asked. "Of course, it's my job to listen," Memphis said, and began pacing around the room. "Don't you think it's a little ridiculous that you're, a pony?" Memphis nodded. "It's a long story, but trust me, I'm much nicer as a pony." I wondered how I was going to explain any of this to Jake. "Listen, we're working on fixing things for you. These kind of errors are extremely rare," Memphis said, laying down on what looked like white throw pillows for ponies. "So you have all the answers?" I asked. "Depends on your question. If it's about this place, I have most of the answers," she said, using her snout to adjust the pillows. "Okay, what is this place and what am I doing here?" I asked, wondering if I should scratch her behind the ears. "Think of it as a supernatural hotel meets airport," she answered whimsically. "And the casino?" Memphis smiled a wide Shetland pony smile. "We tried a lot of things before we settled on the casino." Now I was the one pacing the room. I wanted answers to so many things, but I wasn't sure where to start. "We'll make it up to you," Memphis said. A moment later, a hologram of my life appeared. It was me and Emily playing tennis. "She's cute. I can see why you like her," Memphis said, "even if she is a bit of a princess." "If you have access to my life, why can't you just send me back?" I asked. Memphis laughed. It's very hard to explain, but some things are computationally irreducible. I had no idea what she was talking about. But before I could go on a tirade, she had another moment of my life playing. It's not as simple as just sending you back to a particular moment. Each series of events is unique and builds on endless other moments leading up to it. I watched as my father sang me to sleep in a rocking chair singing a lullaby. "Am I really dead?" I asked. "Yes and no," Memphis said. "Death, as you would define it, definitely no, but death, how we define it, yes." "Who is we, the bureaucrats who run this place?" I asked. Memphis was back up, pacing. "We are a collective of beings who manage the transitions, the overlaps, the in-betweens of existence," Memphis said, matter-of-factly. The next hologram filled the room, showing countless Earths and galaxies. "It's not a bureaucracy in the way you're thinking, more like a network, a system that balances and reallocates energies and consciousness," Memphis continued. "Your concept of bureaucrats isn't far off, but it's more complex and less frustrating, usually." The hologram disappeared, and it was just the two of us again. Memphis stopped pacing and looked directly at me, her eyes surprisingly deep for a pony's. "Your stay here, the mix-up with your cousin, it's an anomaly, not the norm. This place, it's a way station, a pause. For most it's seamless, a blip. For you it's been a bit more extended." I had to admit, talking to a pony about existential transitions wasn't how I'd imagined my afterlife. Yet here I was, and oddly enough it felt right in a way I couldn't explain. "So what now? I stay here forever? Wait for some cosmic clerical error to sort itself out?" I asked, trying to keep the frustration from my voice. Memphis chuckled, a sound that was strangely comforting. "Hurry up and wait. Sound familiar?" I wasn't in the mood for jokes. She told me they would come and get me when they had worked out the issues, and until then I should try and enjoy my stay. I walked out of the office and completely forgot that Jake had been waiting for me the entire time. "My God, I thought you'd never come out of there," Jake said, and ran up and hugged me. "I thought maybe they'd sent you back," Jake said. "Come on, you took so long, I'm actually in the mood to eat." And once again we were sitting at the buffet with empty plates stacked in front of us. But it wasn't the same. I knew this would be my last meal with Jake. "There's something I have to tell you," I said, somberly. Jake slurped down a fork full of spaghetti with marinara sauce. "What is it, buddy?" "I found the donut," I said. "That's awesome! We can find my memories, and maybe we don't need to go back at all. I mean, if we can both remember, what's even the point of living?" Jake said. "Only a person who can't remember would say something like that," I responded. I knew that if Jake had his memories, he would want to go back to a life with meaning and purpose. You don't need to replay your past life because you've learned whatever it was you were supposed to learn. It would be like going back to kindergarten, I said, and then had to explain what kindergarten was for the next few minutes. It slowly dawned on Jake that this was goodbye. I had barely finished the thought when the suits arrived. "Jake, we're ready to take you back," a suit said politely. Jake sat in silence in front of stacks of empty plates. "But I'm not ready to go back." I lifted up my hand and pointed around me. "What else is there for you to see here?" "But the donut," Jake said. "I found it," I said. A tear fell down Jake's cheek. "But I don't want to leave you here alone." There was a selfish part of me that wanted Jake to stay, but I knew a true friend would never ask someone to stay in a place like this for no reason. "You have to leave, Jake, not for my sake, but for all those people you cannot remember. All the people who need you," I said, my own eyes starting to tear up. "Jake, it's time to go," the other suit said. We both stood and looked at each other one last time, and then Jake smiled, and hugged me. "I'll see you on the other side." I waited for Jake and the two suits to disappear before breaking down into tears. I knew I would probably never see Jake again. I found myself back at my hotel room, staring at the ceiling, wide awake. I wondered where Jake had gone and what he was doing. I thought perhaps he was a newborn child. But then there was no such thing as time. He might already be a grandfather by now. I thought back to the day we met, jumping from the 5th floor and having to explain almost everything to him. I hoped wherever he was that he would find a friend that was, well, a lot like him. I sat in silence for what seemed like eons, and then there was a knock at the door. "Come on in, it's unlocked," I said, and a suit entered. "Randy, we're ready to send you back." I should have been overjoyed, but instead I felt numb. All I wanted was to go back, and now all I wanted was closure. But closure to what? I stood up and followed the suit to the office. He led me through the labyrinth of office hallways until we were finally back at the office of Memphis. The orbs were still floating. "Good news, Randy. We've fixed the timeline and everything should be as good as new," Memphis said, a hologram appearing of me in a car driving through an intersection. "We're sending you back to the moment you last remember," Memphis said. "But I'm going to die," I said. "What's the point of that?" "None of us want a time loop. You won't be dying again," Memphis said. "Well, not for a while anyway." The orbs above Memphis melded until they became a portal of white light just like in the movies. "Are you ready?" Memphis asked. "Nice touch," I said as I walked toward it. She smiled her big pony smile again and said, "We aim to please. Have a safe trip." And a moment later, I was in my car, and in the next second I could hear the crunch of metal on metal as the bus careened into my vehicle. And then I must have blacked out. When I woke up, the bus driver was sitting over me. Everything was blurry, and then his face came into focus. "Jake!" I exclaimed. The bus driver appeared confused. His name badge read Jake. "Is it really you?" I mumbled. "Yeah, I'm Jake. Just sit still. The ambulance is on its way," Jake said, looking around to see if the ambulance had arrived. I tried to sit up and give Jake a hug, but then I felt the pain in my back and laid back down. "Jake, I thought I'd never see you again." One of the passengers standing beside Jake looked at him. "Does he know you?" Jake shook his head. "He's delirious." And then the world went black again, and I woke up in a hospital bed. "Mom, he's opened his eyes!" I gazed down at a young boy that looked a lot like me. Beside me was a big bouquet of flowers with a note from Jake that read, "Sorry I hit you, get well soon." A moment later, a blonde-haired woman leaned in and kissed me on the forehead. "Thank God, we thought we were going to lose you." "Emily?" I said, confused. And then she leaned in and kissed me deeply. In that moment I realized what Memphis meant when she said they would make it up to me.
This week's story was The Man Who Remembered, an original story by Spiritus Dei. You can find more of their work at Substack, and if you have a story you'd like to contribute to this series, you can visit submissions.soundconceptmedia.com or just follow the link in the show notes. Coming up next week, a story called We're Civilized by Alex Apostolides and Mark Clifton. It turns out the fate of Mars and the fate of Earth are intertwined in a way you probably wouldn't have expected. Auditory Anthology is curated and produced by me, Keith Conrad. Your narrator is Darren Marlar. Be sure to check out Darren's award-winning paranormal podcast, Weird Darkness, available at weirddarkness.com or your podcast app of choice.